Okay. Now have a lie down on your backs. So it's nice to see that people have paid some attention when Jenny was saying to fill up the area. But there are a few mats left if people want to come more into the centre of the room. So just notice how you're transitioning now into your ATM place, because this lesson doesn't have a specific scan. So we're just going to start off. And I was just thinking of Zoran before with so's and now's. So there you go. Would you bend your knees and bring your feet to standing? And start to move your pelvis so that you create an arch in your lower back. Feldenkrais in his instructions talks about a belt. You know, that if you can lift the belt off the floor, but if you think, it depends again on what the fashion culture is at the time. If you're wearing, pants on your hips and your belt's hanging quite low down, or if the belt is more at waist height. But the general idea is maybe within that area that you're exploring how to lift that part of your lower back away from the floor by doing a movement of your pelvis. So it's not if you think of a rolling movement, you're rolling the pelvis towards your feet. So the lower back is coming away from the floor. And I think Susan mentioned, talking of imagery, the image of Feldenkrais used of about a mouse going, running under the arch of the back. And in this lesson, he does actually say that, create an arch in your back where we won't think of the mouse, but where you could maybe fit your hand coming through. So there's like a tunnel that you're creating by moving your pelvis towards your feet. And as you do that, you could notice if there's a connection with that movement up through your spine to your head. So what happens in your back? And can you feel anything occurring higher up in your back with your neck and your head? Does your head stay... Whoops. Sorry. Does your head stay still? I haven't got my little bag for the... No, that's quite all right, Jenny. I'll clip it. But talking of dropping things, I was at the tennis on Thursday night, and it was a very, very hot night. And we're sitting, in the stadium. And first of all, the guy walked in with a plastic cup of beer, and he tripped. And so he spilt the beer on the son of this family of three. So there was this, anyway, so the game went on. And I think after the second set, I decided to stand up with my drink. And what did I do? Dropped it. And it went crash. And I got my gin and tonic all over the father. who luckily had put his telescopic camera out of the way. And so maybe I've got the dropsies. So leave what you're doing and take a pause. And return to having your knees bent and your feet on the floor. And now you're moving your pelvis in the opposite direction. So you're thinking of flattening your lower back to the floor. And if you think anatomically, you know, we've got the pelvis and then the spine, and the spine connects to the pelvis at one end and to the head at the other end. And as you do this movement, can you feel the movement traveling up through your spine to whatever level? It might be you feel or aware of the movement in your chest, between your two shoulder blades, or could even the movement could be transmitted further up towards your head. And if you feel the movement up towards your head, how does your head respond to the movement? And as you pay attention to the different parts of yourself, can you also have an awareness of the air entering into your nostrils? And earlier today, we did all of the breathing lessons and focusing on the breath. And can that be part of your sensory experience? I think of just lifting your tailbone simply and easily into the air and then returning it to the floor. And now combine the two movements. And by that I mean that you're continuing, or alternate would be another way of putting it, that once you lift your tailbone into the air and you feel the lower back having greater contact with the floor, and then you roll your pelvis to create that arch in your lower back. And go from one movement to the other movement and see how you can make the movement easier and simpler. And as you do the movement, are you aware of your feet and the contact they have with the ground? And does that contact change during the movement? And as you're doing it, feel what happens with your chin. If your chin moves away from your chest or toward your chest during the movement. And the pelvis stays. It's a different movement than was in Zoran's lesson where he got you to really lift the pelvis off the floor, say to shoulder level. It's more a rolling of the pelvis toward and away from your head. Then leave it and lie quietly with your legs long and your arms down by your side. And as you do that, you could draw in, I'm thinking of drawing in the picture of how your pelvis is being supported by the floor, the curves of the spine, the lower back and the neck, and how your head is resting. And in your mind, you could explore that connection of the line of your spine at one end with your head and at the other end with the pelvis. Because as the lesson continues, it's a lot about the transmission through the spine up towards the head. And transition back to the same configuration of having your feet on the floor and your knees up toward the ceiling. And return to that same movement that you did previously. And as you roll your pelvis toward your head, think of pushing through your feet. So feel how you push through the feet. And then as you roll the pelvis toward your feet, there's a lessening or a lightening of the feet against the floor. But really have that sense of how you could push through your feet and how the movement gets transmitted up towards your head. And as that movement goes up towards your head, does your chin move away from your chest or toward your chest? Or is it more of a sliding movement of your head against the floor? And so, again, it's not a large bridging movement. It's a movement of just rolling the pelvis so that the lower back comes in contact with the floor, and then rolling your pelvis towards your feet so that you're creating that arch-like movement. And you're feeling as you do that how the movement of the pelvis, you push on your feet and it goes through your spine to your head. And just accentuate that movement of pushing through your feet and feel if you really sort of push how that movement goes up the spine to the head. So it's a bit like, I'm thinking of the volume of the movement in terms of a musicality, that it's a bit louder as you push through the feet and the pelvis flattens the lower back toward the head. And feel what happens in the curve of your neck and how the head responds to the movement. And as you do that, is there that background awareness of the air coming into your nose and then leaving the nose? And then let it go, allow your legs to slide long. And tune in and observe the effects of these movements. And if you have more contact with the floor, And once more, bend your knees and bring your feet to the floor and the knees up toward the ceiling. And this time, interlace your hands and bring them behind your head. And bring your elbows so they're not far apart, but so that they're closer toward each other, so that you can really cradle your head between your elbows. And now lift your head from the floor. So you're using your arms and your hands to support your neck. And so, to think about that, the elbows, if they're closer together, it's going to make that easier. And now in that position, continue the movement that you were doing of once lifting the tailbone away from the floor and then doing a pelvic movement so the tailbone goes towards the floor. So you're flattening your lower back and then you're arching it with your head being supported by your hands and lifted from the floor. And with your head now being lifted from the floor, how does this change the response of your head to the movement? So think, if it's possible, keep your head up in the air and do a few movements. And if you feel then that you'd like to return the head to the floor, do so. And then bring it up again and do some movements of the pelvis. But with the head in the air, observe what happens as the pelvis moves in this fashion. Does the head change its position? And take a rest. And bring your arms a little bit away from the side of your body so that the arms are approximately 45 degrees away from the sides of your body. And in this position, you're now going to explore the same movement. Now, your legs are staying long, so it's a change of position. The legs are long, and you can have the legs a little bit apart. But if it's comfortable, the legs are long, and you're going to have the same idea of once lifting the tailbone off the floor to roll the pelvis towards your head, and then doing the opposite movement. But here it's quite a different configuration. So how can you use your heels and your hands to help you with the movement? Feel how you could press into your heels. And if your palms are on the floor, you could also press your palms into the floor to help with that transmission through your skeleton. So think of pressing into the heels as the pelvis rolls towards your head. And feel as you press into your heels what the front of your foot does. So think that the front of your foot can also move. So it could become a bit of a flapping motion of your feet. So gradually increase the movement and feel if you can create like an oscillation through your body. So you press with your feet, the front of your feet move a little bit towards your head and away from your head. So it's like a a flapping or oscillatory movement, and go a little bit quicker, because I think that, in this movement, by increasing the pace, it actually is, I know for me, assisted with that transmission through the skeleton from the feet all the way up through the hip joints to the pelvis, spine, and head. And explore how you can find an easy, simple rhythm. And pause. And we're going to keep on exploring this movement of the connection of the pelvis to the head with variations of position. And bend your right knee and bring your right foot to the floor, but your left leg is staying long. And start to do the same movement of pushing through the right foot and feeling how the pelvis rolls towards your head, the tailbone lifts, and then you can use the right foot to allow the pelvis to move toward your feet and the arching of your lower back. And you can also use your left foot, but feel how you can generate the movement in this position. And how easily can you do it? And as the movement goes through you in this asymmetrical fashion, what parts of your chest are involved? What happens to the head? And continue to do the movement, but slowly allow your right buttock to come away from the floor. So the knee stays pointing up toward the ceiling, and you just start to lift the right buttock away from the floor. And then in that position, you continue to do the movement. And again, if it's possible for you, do some movements with that right buttock in the air and play with the rate of movement. So you can do a few movements slowly and then gradually increase the movement and feel that transmission from the foot through the pelvis and spine to the head. And you can notice if the chin moves away from your chest or towards the chest is in different parts of the movement, or is it more that the head slides along the floor? And what part, if your right buttock's lifted from the floor, what ribs are now being massaged by the floor? Let it go. And having now done the movement with one leg in this position, what effect has that had on the contact you have with the side? Has it made one side feel larger or different compared to the other? And you're going to do the same movement, but this time with the left foot on the floor and the left knee up toward the ceiling. And start the movement by just pushing through the foot with the left side of the pelvis still in contact with the floor. And then as you go along doing the movement, you can gradually lift the left side of the pelvis or the left buttock off the floor. And notice how much of the movement occurs by pushing through the foot and then allowing the pressure on the foot to decrease, and the knee will move away from your body. And you could observe if it's mainly your left foot that does the movement, or is the movement assisted when you incorporate the right foot and the right heel into the movement. And as the right side of your pelvis comes into the air, feel how you take more weight toward the left buttock and the left side of your ribs. Oh, sorry, right side. Thank you, Alison. And continue to do the movement. So the left side of the pelvis is in the air, and then make the movement a little bit quicker. So start oscillating the movement and feeling how you can be a bit like a jelly. The movement can go through your whole body, all the way up to your head. And as you go a little bit quicker, is it clearer how the head responds? And you can get a sense of your spine being, I think he says, pushed up between the shoulder blades and chest towards your head. And with all of that happening on, can you feel that? Can you be aware of the air coming in and out of your nose? And then take a pause, allow your legs to go long. And notice where your attention is, if you're observing how your pelvis is being supported by the floor, or if there's any changes between the right and left side of your chest in the contact either side has with the floor. And you're going to go back to having your right foot in standing and the right knee up toward the ceiling. And you're turning your head toward the left. And you're going to bring your right hand behind your head so that you can hold on to your left ear. And your head is turned toward the left. And you might want to have, explore where you have the elbow, if it's more cradling the head or flat towards the floor. But the idea is that your arms supporting your head. And in that position, return to doing the movement of pushing through the right foot and finding how the pelvis can move both toward your head and away from your head, and the response of the movement in the head. So do a few movements with your arm in that position, and then use your arm to lift your head away from the floor and continue with the movement. Your right hand supporting your head, and by the support of the right hand, you're lifting your head. So your shoulder may come a little bit away from the floor. Yeah, the head's turned towards the left, so there'll be a little bit of a roll. Okay. But feel how the head can be lifted from the floor and how you can cradle your head within your arm as you do the movement, because it changes. If your head's in contact with the floor, there's a restriction of the surface of the floor on the head. So when it's lifted from the floor, it doesn't need to be lifted high, but you haven't got that contact of the floor on your hand or your head as you do the movement. And your elbow, I would have it more toward the ceiling so that it's supporting your head. And the head stays in the air as you do this movement. So your head's turned to the left, the head's in the air, and then you can gradually increase the pace of the movement. The right side of the pelvis is in the air, and you find that oscillating movement through your body. So it's a bit like you're pushing up and down all the way from the pelvis to the head. And the left side of your ribs, I think of it like getting a massage with the floor. You know, they're moving up and down. And remember, you can let it go and return to it. And then just let it go. And I often think, you know, how Feldenkrais was the master of variation, of how he could take a movement sequence or a movement pattern, and then he created different variations around that. And with each variation, there's a mechanical or biomechanical difference in the movement, but it's also a novelty in how you feel and explore the movement. And in the next movement, it's very similar, but there's a twist of lemon or difference in it. So you've again got the right foot standing, but this time you're turning your head toward the right. And the left arm is coming in the same fashion as before, behind the head toward the right ear. And in that configuration, you're going to use your arm to bring your head away from the floor, and you're going to continue to explore the same movement as previously. But feel the difference that the head being turned toward the right makes. So the head's towards the right and lifted. The right side of the pelvis to some degree will be in the air. And the tailbone is lifting and returning to the floor, and you're pushing through. So again, you could think of what we did earlier of accentuating the movement of pushing through the foot, up through the spine to the head. And gradually as you do it, you can increase the pace of the movement so that the movement transmits more easily through your skeleton toward your head. So play, you know, with the gradual bit like I'm thinking of the accelerator in a car, that you can, gradually, you're not going to go from 60 to 100, but you'll go through 70 and 80 and gradually increase the speed. And so the movement's going up from the foot and pelvis up to the head. And how can you make it simple and easy so it doesn't require a lot of effort? And in this strange pattern, can you return to sensing the air coming in through your nostrils and then being exhaled from the nose? And then allow your head to return to the floor, the arm to come down to your side, and your legs to lie long. And if you're thinking of the structure of the lesson, you might be curious or intuitive of what the next steps may be. This time you're going to have your left foot standing. And the left knee's up towards the ceiling. And your right leg is long. So got the left foot up and the right leg is long. So it's the other total opposite with the legs of what you did before. And turn your head to face towards your right. And bring the left hand behind the head toward the right ear. Allow the head to come away from the floor and begin that exploration of pushing through from the feet, allowing the pelvis to move up and down and sensing that transmission up towards the head. And you could do a few movements with the left side of your pelvis on the floor. But then, as we did in that earlier part of the lesson, the left side of your pelvis can lift into the air so that you're more rolled or turned towards the right side. And then in that position, you continue the movement. So feel how by bringing the left side of your pelvis into the air, that there's more weight on the right side of your chest and shoulder blade, and how then you could, in that place, you could explore the speed of the movement so that you find that sort of oscillation of going up and down and feeling the movement going through your torso up towards your head. And what is it like on this side? It's basically a mirror of the movement you did on the other side. So does this side feel easier, or you have already a better understanding of it? And if you're not pausing, then give yourself a pause. And what happens as you are lying there quietly? what does your attention go to? Does it go to the breath coming through the nostril? Does it go to how much of your pelvis is on the floor, or how the upper back and chest are lying? Or it might go to the curves of your back, of sensing how the curve of your lower back and neck are now supported by the floor. So now for the second variation with the left leg in standing, and the difference being that the head is going to be now turned toward the left. So you've got your left foot standing, the left knee up toward the ceiling, but you've got your head turned toward the left, and your right arm is behind the head toward the left ear, and the head's lifted away from the floor. And in that position, you're going to continue with the movement that you've been doing, exploring, feeling how the pelvis is moving toward the head and away, and how that movement gets transmitted up through your spine to the head. And does the chin move towards your chest, or does it just stay in the same position? And so gradually, if the left side of your pelvis is on the floor, feel what happens if it comes a little bit away from the floor. But your head is turned toward the left. Head is turned toward the left. And so this is more of a twisting movement, where before it all went together, where now he's got you with the left leg standing and the head turned to the left. So depending on your organization, you'll have to play with, how far you want the pelvis into the air. And see if you can find that nice sort of easy, light oscillation. So how can you transmit the force through your skeleton, not having to use a lot of power, but it just sort of easily goes up and down. And as you do that, what's happening with your breath in through the nose and out of the nose? And leave it. And lie with your legs long and your arms down by your side. And notice sort of what arousal level you're in. If you're just drifting in and out of the waking state, I think a few people have dozed off. Or if you're in more of a learning state, that you're able to attend to yourself at the same time as you're lying still or doing the movements. This time, bring both of your feet to standing. So bend both knees and bring the feet to the floor. And bring your arms over your head so the back of the hands are resting somewhere comfortably on the floor. And so your arms are somewhere comfortable. If possible, the elbows are straight. So if it's, find the distance you want, the back of your hands above your head so that your arms can be relatively straight or lengthened. And then go back to what we did earlier on in the lesson, where you press your tailbone into the floor to create that tunnel or arch under your lower back. And then you lift your tailbone from the floor and flatten your back. And feel how that movement is now, if the size of the pelvic movement has increased. And notice how the movement goes up towards your head. So again, you're not doing a movement where your whole back comes away from the floor. You're just lifting the tailbone and sending the transmission up via the spine to the head. And then doing the opposite with your tailbone. And as you do that, feel what happens in the head. Does the head slide along the floor? Or do you feel that your chin moves away from your throat and then toward your throat? So there's the two possibilities of the movement. And if you accentuate the movement of pressing with your feet, does that change what happens in your head? And then as you lean on your tailbone, lift your head away from the floor. And then as you do the movement where the tailbone lifts from the floor, allow your head to return to the floor. So when you're leaning on the tailbone and there's an arching in your lower back, feel how the head could lift from the floor. And then as you press that imaginary belt into the floor, how the head would return to the floor. And allow your chest to be soft and breathe as you do the movement. Yep, so as you press your tailbone into the floor and create that space underneath the lower back, the head comes away from the floor. And then as you press, into that area of the lower back, so the tailbone lifts from the floor, the head returns to the floor. And then gradually increase the speed. And sense, if you increase the speed, what happens to the coordination of this movement of the head. Does it become easier and more simple? And just make it, light and simple. And then leave it. Bring your arms down by your side and allow your legs to lengthen. And keeping your legs long, bring your arms in that same configuration over your head. So the back of the hands are over the head, resting on the floor, and your legs are lying long. And you're going to return to the movement that we did earlier of pressing the heels into the floor and moving the feet so that you can create that oscillating movement from up through your feet up towards your head. And so continue to do that. So it's still the same movement that once the tailbone lifts into the air and once it presses into the floor. But gradually, see if you can find an easy way of the movement being transmitted up through your spine. And do it in various speeds. You can do a few movements more slowly and feel what the connection's like. And if that connection is clearer, if you increase the speed. And can you get a sense of that connection from the pelvis up through your spine to your head? And feel what your head does as your chin move away. So there's two different ways of doing it with your head, how the head responds. It might be that the chin is moving away from the throat and then towards the throat, or that the head slides along the floor. And see if you can find both. Sorry, right? Yep, so one of the options, if you could rock, it could be like you're rocking your head, so it's more like a wave-like movement and the chin goes towards the throat and away. And the other one is more that the head, the curve of the neck doesn't change and that the movement just gets transmitted up through the spine and the head slides along the floor. And in the lesson, he calls it skewering of the spine. So he's obviously had his Barbie and skewered things. And he's thinking of, how that transmission can travel easily through the spine to the head. And then let it go. And having done all of these variations, you're going to return to some of the movements that we did more towards the beginning of the lesson. So if you could bend both of your knees and bring your feet to the floor and have your arms down by your side. And do the movement at the beginning of the lesson where you had the idea of lifting that imaginary belt away from the floor and creating a space underneath the back. And then doing the opposite movement. So once you lean on the tailbone, and then once you lift the tailbone. And notice if the movements become any larger and simpler. And is there a clearer connection of the movement up towards the head? And continue the movement. And again, gradually think of how you could accelerate the pace of the movement. And if that's a gradual acceleration, or is it more digital? You know, are you a driver that likes speeding off at the traffic lights, or do you gradually increase your speed? But gradually notice as you go quicker of how that affects the movement transmission up to the head. And then continue the movement, but think of accentuating the pushing down through the feet. So you push through the feet. You can change the pace, but you're really pushing through the feet and feeling that skewer of the spine going straight up to the head. And if you think, you know, it's that thing of images, but if you were to think of that image of what he named the lesson of skewing of the spine, all the way up towards your head, sense how your head could slide along the floor and the force would be transmitted from your feet directly up toward the head. And the chin would stay in relatively in the same position. And just do, in the lesson he says, do 20 movements like this of accentuating the pushing of the feet and feeling the force coming up through your spine. But I don't think you need to do 20 movements. And then leave it all alone, allow your legs to slide long. And whichever way you do, just listen to the effect that the lessons had on the contact you have with the floor, on your breathing. And think of how you're going to transition up into standing, of how you could, you know, choose to roll onto your side and then come up to sitting and then transition into standing. And then, you know, bring that idea into being and come towards sitting and gradually into standing. And how is it in standing? How is the floor underneath you? The length of your spine? And then it's home time. I think I can allow you out 5 minutes early. So have a walk round and we'll see you tomorrow. Yeah, and we've got an announcement.
The announcement is pick your cup, put your cup in the kitchen. The kitchen is the door behind that wall. Okay? Thank you.